Kristi Dosh. We've had Kristi on before. My goodness, if you cover sports, then you know that there are legal activities or issues or stories or more. And she joins us on 365 Sports with Paul Craig, and I'm David Smoke. Kristi, thank you very much for your time. Did I see where you're writing a book about NIL?
Oh, I am done writing the book. Thank goodness. I actually turned in the final draft about an hour ago.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, you could have like added 3 chapters just in the last week with all this stuff. How much of a project was that with it kind of being fluid, but obviously a changer in college athletics?
Oh, I started writing this in October of 2021, and I very quickly realized things were too fluid to write about it back then. So I started seriously looking at it again, maybe beginning of 2024, and wrote it through most of last year and into this year. And the final chapter is on the House settlement and revenue sharing. And there had to just be a lot of, well, I think this is what's going to happen. And if it does, here's what it's going to look like. But I think, even if the settlement isn't approved, I think revenue sharing is coming. And so I really wanted to give parents and athletes some ideas about what these contracts are looking like and what they should and shouldn't sign when they get those.
So as revenue sharing is implemented here in the next few months, and then changed again over the years before we get to any kind of, reasonable collectively bargain agreement, what kind of contracts and what should things look like that are different than they are now, so that you don't have NICO situations?
Yeah, there's reasonable things in these contracts, like morals clauses that we see in professional athletes' contracts. We see some language in there increasing or decreasing payments dependent on some variables that include like breaking team rules or not going to class. You could get your sort of pay docked for that. Has a lot of terms you would expect to see in employment contracts, although at this point, the student athletes still are not considered employees. And that's really what a lot of the attorneys are jumping on is, hey, there's a lot of restrictions in these contracts and they very much favor the institutions. This looks like employment, but I don't think that we're going to get to that employment question during the current administration. So I think that revenue sharing will look like this for probably the next 4 years at least.
How much will the 20.5, and of course that number, if the settlement is ever approved, that number will go up slightly, I guess, every year. How much does that affect NIL in not what they're saying, but how much you think it will, if at all?
Protect your online privacy with Nord VPN. Browse securely, access content from anywhere, and keep your data safe with military-grade encryption. Whether at home or on the go, Nord VPN ensures your digital freedom. Stay secure. Download NordVPN today at nordvpn.com. That's NORDVPN.com.
I actually don't think it affects it that much. I mean, we've seen a few schools, and I mean very few, who have consolidated their collective sort of into their athletic department, or the collective is going away because they're not going to be doing these, huge deals outside of the athletic department anymore. But that is the exception, not the rule. Virtually all of the Power 4 institutions are keeping their collective, and that NIL money is what's going to allow them to go above that revenue share ceiling. So that ceiling the first year is $20.5 million. It goes up 4% a year, and there are some look-ins that can make it even larger than that. But then athletes can earn on top of that through NIL deals, and there's no cap on that. So there's really no reason not to have your collective continue to engage in those activities.
So for the schools, they're kind of limited after that in what they can put in. I know in your article you suggested, like good faith arguments. What else can the schools reasonably put in there? Like good faith arguments, good faith negotiations. If they want to leave, what can the schools put in without getting sued?
I think you're going to see a lot of 1-year deals for guys because they're not willing to commit to them beyond that if they're unsure about how they're going to perform, or they want to protect against that athlete transferring. There are some multi-year deals, particularly for quarterbacks and some of the other key positions, because they want to have a way to hold on to those guys. The problem is the things that they're putting in these contracts to try to hold on to them, where they're going to try to claw back money, or they're going to have a buyout clause like a coaching contract would have. It remains to be seen if any of them will actually enforce it, because they don't want to be known as that school. They don't want to miss out on future recruits because of how they treat a current athlete. And so the experts I have talked to sort of differ on whether they think schools will even enforce those things that they're putting into the contracts.
I saw. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think they'll protect by having those payments be in small amounts. Like, they're not going to give you everything up front. They're going to dole it out over the course of the season so that you don't hold out in the middle of the season or decide to stop playing or enter the transfer portal the first chance you get. So I think they'll protect themselves that way.
I saw that you had reached out, to Mitt Winter, Mulvaney, and Darren Heitner. And those guys have been all over social media at times with their own angles on all of this. What did you learn from them, from what they think?
It's really interesting because I know all those guys personally. I have been on panels with them before. And, the reason I talked to all of them is because I knew they all felt a little differently about it. Mitt is really big on wanting, particularly football and men's basketball athletes, to be employees. And he believes these contracts are employment contracts. He's out there talking about employment every single day. So I knew that's where he was going to come in. And Darren's not so far down that path. Darren thinks that that's possible and that there's certainly things in there that are problematic for the athletes that he's reviewing their contracts, but he doesn't beat that drum for employment quite so hard. And he does, work with collectives and universities in the past as well. So he's kind of working on all sides of the industry, and it probably depends on who he's representing as to, how zealous he is about one of those opinions. And then I would say Ryan's a little more like middle of the road. He wants they all want what's best for the athletes, but he's not as vocal about employment either. So, and I knew they had all seen different contracts. That's the thing, is that every single school has a different revenue sharing contract. And when I was writing the book, they were the three guys I knew were looking at contracts, and I wanted to talk to all of them because they were looking at stuff from different schools, and everybody's handling it a little differently.
Yeah, and I think I've seen Darren, who we've had all of them, I believe, on the show, but Mulvaney contacted me yesterday that said that the athlete or whoever represents them has to be careful because he thinks that they're giving up too much commission. Is that right, Kristi? Is that kind of his take too?
Yeah, actually, all three of them have made those comments along the way. And I was just editing that section of my book today, so I remember it. When it comes to brand deals, it's pretty normal to take, say, 20% of a brand deal if you're the agent. That's totally normal. There's nothing wrong with that. But they're all saying the problem is when you're trying to take 20% of an NIL contract or of a revenue sharing agreement, because that does look more like a pro contract. And in the pros, the leagues limit what the agents can take, and it's anywhere from 2 to 5% is what's the norm. Mm-hmm. So for an agent to be taking 20 or 30% of a revenue sharing deal or a collective NIL deal from an athlete, none of them feel like that's appropriate. And I agree with them. I mean, I'm an attorney too. I have not served as an agent, but I've had agents, and I think they're right about that.
So I don't know if you saw the story. I'm sure you did. That Nico Iamaleava has apparently committed to go play at UCLA, which was one of the schools. He's from California. Who knows the dollars or whatever, or the whatever behind it. But what are your thoughts about now, if that is, in fact, it looks like it is official?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all figured he would end up somewhere, and it wasn't going to be an SEC school because of the rules the SEC has. But, it doesn't surprise me that it happened pretty quickly. I would assume he was maybe already having some conversations with folks, as this was all brewing last week. I can't wait to find out the dollar amount, because I'm actually going to be surprised if he's getting more than he was going to get at Tennessee. I also talked to some people at different schools who were like, we don't know if we want to touch that, between him and his father sort of inserting himself in the situation and some of the comments that he made in the media and on social media. Not everybody's willing to take that on.
Kristi Dosh with us, Forbes.com with us on 365 Sports.
Kristi, just, in a macro sense, how do you feel about the way that the media deals are negotiated and what that means for the future of athletes? Because, different conferences have different media deals. I mean, the probably best thing would be for all the conferences to have one media deal and share it. That's never going to happen in any kind of world. But how does that affect anything when you've got contracts going through?
Where I think it's actually most pronounced is women's basketball, because there were studies that were done before this last contract that showed women's basketball should probably be negotiated as a separate television deal. And it pegged the value at a much higher value than what they ended up with being part of the deal with so many Olympic sports that was eventually reached by the NCAA. So I think women's basketball players will have a good argument that, hey, we're being told that we're, say, only getting 5% of the revenue sharing money because we only bring in 5% of the money, but it's not our fault we only bring in 5%. They negotiated this deal that undervalued us. I think they have a really strong argument there.
Kristi, I saw a question, if you don't mind, on your Twitter feed because I was stalking you. When you mentioned the book, et cetera, do you think college sports ends up unionizing when it's all said and done? And you mentioned yes because of what, football, men's basketball, but what the other sports, probably not?
Yeah, I do think that if we see employment happen, so far the biggest attempts at unionizing we've seen have been football and basketball. It was Northwestern football players a decade ago. It was Dartmouth men's basketball players in the last couple of years. I think that's where we'll see it happen first. And then I think it's hard to have it for men's basketball and not women, so maybe it goes there too. But it's hard to imagine it trickling to the other sports. But on the other hand, the biggest test for employment is supposed to be the measure of control the employer has over the employee. And that does look the same for every sport. The only difference is the revenue generated. So I think it really depends who's on the National Labor Relations Board at the time and how they come down on that. I'm not saying that I'm advocating for them being employees. I actually think there's some, pros and cons that need to be weighed for that. And I even know athletes who aren't interested in that once they learn the pros and cons. But it seems very much to me like it's headed in that direction for football and basketball.
So how do you collectively bargain without being an employee?
So you cannot. You have to be an employee in order to collectively bargain. And then there has to be a collective bargaining unit, which there really isn't now. There have been several that have tried to start up and, have some athletes who have become members, but, nothing big enough for what would be needed at this scale. But you have unions in other industries that come in. Like I have a friend who's a ski patroller, and ski patrol guys just started unionizing the last few years, and they're working with a union, I think from the steel workers who helped them put all that together. So there's infrastructure through other organizations.
Do you think the settlement is passed? And if yes, when will it be passed?
Oh, I'm way more nervous about it than I was 2 weeks ago, and much more nervous than I was a few months ago. I thought for sure it was a done deal. Mm-hmm. I pretty much wrote my book chapter that way. But I am surprised that the NCAA and the plaintiffs' attorneys as well have not been willing to make, it sounds like, most of the bulk of the changes that Judge Wilkin asked for. The fact that they're not willing to grandfather in the roster limits, I don't know if she's going to go for that or not. I'm really nervous about it now.
I do.
But that being said, I think revenue sharing still happens. I think the NCAA will change its rules and revenue sharing will still happen because these contracts have already gone out for next year. So the genie's out of the bottle.
Yeah, I wondered if I see that they have added or whatever she wanted them to do, but you're right that it almost left out that the roster, whatever you want to call it. And that, I don't think she's going to approve it if it doesn't include some sort of slowly but surely putting that in. Do you?
No, she got too many letters from current athletes and prospective high school athletes who are seeing their roster spots go away because of this settlement. And I don't think that's what she wanted to happen as a result of this case, and doesn't, think it's fair and wants to do some grandfathering in there. And I'm shocked that they were just like, nope, we're not changing that. So I'm not sure how she's going to react to that.
Kristi, thank you very much for everything. Appreciate your time whenever we can get you. Good luck with the book. I just put the link that you have pinned at your Twitter feed on the pre-order. So I just put that on our chat room, and hopefully a lot of people will have a chance to maybe learn a lot more about it than I think a lot of us really do know. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
You're welcome. Kristi Dosh Forbes, sports business. And my goodness, what a time.